Let me get this straight. I put my hand on you and you can kill me. You can plunge a knife into my heart because I put my hand on you. We are in a bad place right now. We are in as bad a place in race relations as I have ever seen in my life, and I have a growing concern. This has almost become a game to some of y'all, picking sides just based on color and demonizing an entire race of people based only on color of two 17-year-old boys, neither of who handled a situation as well as it should have been. But under any reasonable analysis, this should not result in a death penalty. I've been to about 20 track meets over the last couple of years, and I just want to share a couple of observations and maybe think a little bit more through this situation, hopefully in a reasonably balanced way, although I don't pretend to have a corner on objectivity. In every single track meet that I have been to, there have been probably an average of 8 to 10 teams. Almost all of those teams have a tent. It has 4 poles. They set them up in the bleachers, and they're roughly 20 feet by 20 feet. Your average track team at these events is, 15 to 20 kids, and they tend to congregate with their team under their tent for a number of very basic and obvious reasons. Number one, because you are a team, and you are competing against other teams. There's a thing about kind of keeping it tight, okay? We are competing against them. We're here to beat them. So we sit together as a team. It's also important fundamentally for teams to sit together because a lot of times all the parents aren't there for all those students. And the coaches are responsible for keeping track of them and making sure they don't get into trouble and get lost or whatever else can happen. So they ask the students to stay around their tent. Yet another reason is these coaches are responsible for making sure that the teams organize themselves at the right time to be at their, to compete in their event. So we're about to do the 4x4, 4x400, and we need all the runners to go down onto the field and register and get ready and stretch and do all those things. So having everyone together allows the coach to kind of manage his team. All right, you guys are up. All right, you guys come back. Go do, that's why you sit together under a team tent and why it's not a free-for-all where people are just kind of roaming from tent to tent and visiting like it's Halloween. It is not that. I would not be surprised that in a thunderstorm that you might want to seek shelter. I don't know how bad that thunderstorm was. It doesn't need to be bad. All you need is some lightning in order for an event to be absolutely postponed and possibly canceled. You would think from some of the reports that it was raining cats and dogs, and this young man would have died of exposure had he not sought shelter under this little tent. I'll tell you about an encounter I had with a tent that wasn't mine. This was last year. It was the middle of the summer. It was about 98 degrees. I had not prepared myself well for this track meet. I didn't have a hat. I didn't have an umbrella. I didn't even have my stadium chair with me. I didn't have my water bottle. I really came underprepared. My bad. But I was expecting to kind of dip in and dip out. I didn't know when I arrived that the whole meet was running about 3 hours behind schedule. So at a certain point, I really started to feel that heat, man. And I did not want to get heat stroke. And so I saw a tent over toward the end of the stadium. and there were a couple of guys sitting under there. And I was just sitting next to it, not in the shade though. And I said, yo, you mind if I grab a little of your shade here? Can I sit there? And there were two young men, both in their mid-30s. One of them looked at me and said, nah. I'm like, all right. But the other guy quickly went, no, man, yeah, you're good. Corrected his friend. What kind of bullshit is that? So I sat under the tent in the corner, a little shade. Again, big tent, 20 by 20. We were, that's a big room. If you imagine a big 20 by 20 room, there was a lot of space there. But had his friend not been there, and had I been sitting in the shade, and this one man who didn't want me there said, hey, man, I don't want you under my tent. And I'd be like, hey, man, I'm about to get some sunstroke, How about a little mercy? I wouldn't have argued with him. I would have just said, all right. If you want to be that way, man, all right, I'll leave your tent. Not a cool thing to do, but it's his tent. Who the hell am I to sit there and claim that I have a full right to be there? Would you go into someone else's locker room, someone else's bedroom, someone else's classroom? I mean, you don't just walk in and claim ownership of a place. Situational awareness. It was not my tent. I did not have permission to be there, and if he asked me to leave, I would have left. But had I not been so amenable to his request, had he said, hey, man, I need you to leave my tent, and I said, why don't you make me? And he came up to me. He said, man, you need to leave this tent. It ain't yours. You're not invited here. You asked. And I said, no. Now you need to leave. And then if he put his hand on me or grabbed my bag to help me away from his tent, I have the right to stab him in the heart and kill him. That's kind of where we have arrived at this, at least the calculus of some commenters on this. He put his hand on him. He fucked around. He found out. He paid for putting his hand on another man, a black man in particular, with his life. That may sound familiar to you. That is not familiar to most people in this country. I'm going to venture that most white people have no clue about how terrified many black people are of the members of their own community. Truth be told, most black people are far, far, far more afraid in reality. Not the things that are spoken and talked about in social media, but in reality. Most black people are far more afraid of being injured or killed by other black people than they ever are of white people. That's the truth. And anything that says, no, I'm much more afraid of white people killing me than I am of black people, then I need you to unpack that for me. I need you to explain that to me because it does not support the data, the reports that we have. We have crime statistics. And it's not arguable. The reality is that a black person is orders of magnitude more likely to be killed by another black person. Yes, proximity is always in effect, but that's not all there is. And we know that's not all there is. We know that there is a higher level of violence per capita in the black community than in any other community in the country. And it distorts the threat, the existential threat that black people have about the entire country. They take this fear, this legitimate fear of being wounded or injured or assaulted by someone in their community, and they make that the whole country. It's very concentrated in your community. We did some research a few years ago during the George Floyd protests, and I think it was the Washington Post or some other organization. It was a progressive media organization, did a poll, and they asked, I think primarily, it may have been both people on both sides of the political spectrum, but I think primarily they asked liberal voters, they asked them to estimate the number of innocent unarmed black men who were killed by police annually. The more one described oneself as a true progressive, the higher one's estimate was. At the high end, I think it was on the order of 10 or 20% of the people polled said that 10,000 unarmed black men were killed by police every year. 10,000. What do you think of that number? Does that sound reasonable? Or is it just open hunting season on unarmed black men? Listen to some people, you would think. I won't belabor this too long, but the numbers went down from 10,000 to 7,000 to 5,000 to 1,000. All of the different levels of guesses of how many unarmed men are killed per year were a gross exaggeration of the reality that 12 people. It varies from year to year. I've seen other years where it was 8. I've seen other years where it was probably 15. 10,000 a year, 12. And if you're walking through the world believing this really big distortion, the way you make decisions and the way you think about the threat of this on a daily basis is based on a boogeyman, not on reality. And I think the black community, based on this distorted threat, feels that they are under assault by a white nation. And it is not true. It is no more true than all these men, these 10,000 men are being killed by policemen. Unarmed men are being killed by policemen. It is not true. I saw a video. There was, in the last couple of years in Africa, there have been a couple of African nations that have had almost a promotion, come back to Africa kind of promotion to the diaspora. Return to your homeland. A lovely thought, yeah? If you're so inclined. And I've heard a lot of interviews that have been done with these African Americans who've made that move to Ghana, for example. I heard one this morning describing why, when asked why she left, because it was just too dangerous to be in America. You step outside, you're going to get shot, killed, stabbed, robbed. Didn't sound like my neighborhood. She was from Baltimore. What is the skin color of the people who were going to rob and shoot and assault and maybe kill her or her family members? White people? Who? Black people. Members of her own community. She was not running away from the terror that white people were inflicting on her. She was running away from the trauma that had been inflicted on her in her own neighborhood by her own people. And it's this distortion and this setting up of white versus black when it's not, it ain't that, y'all, that informs this implied threat. That if you believe that all of these white people are intent on murdering all of these black people, then the slightest provocation of someone asking you to leave a tent where you don't belong, or putting their hand on your bag or putting their hand on your shoulder. There is supposedly some video footage of this. We will find out. If there's actual footage of this, as the police have reported, we'll actually see exactly what happened. I think you can probably conclude that if the police do in fact have video as they say, and they have gotten a grand jury or a judge to hold him on a first-degree murder charge, you can probably assume that that footage supports that charge. Okay? And I think what happened is that this small, shouldn't have been a big interaction turned into almost a referendum on an existential referendum. You are a black person. You are not welcome here. You must leave. And if I move toward you, I am likely to kill you. That's what you think me moving toward you and asking you to leave is going to result in. It is going to result in a threat on your life if I reach out and touch you or grab you. I don't know, man, but I'm telling you, in my life, that has never justified plunging a knife into another human being's heart. It would justify pushing someone off of you, get your hands off of me. It would be even wiser to just say, all right, man, that's some bullshit, but I'll leave. Fuck you. And you just leave. Or you sit there and jaw back and forth and talk a bunch of shit. But you do not have the right to kill another human being for them asking you to leave a tent and putting a hand on you. Was that? I saw his mugshot, Karmelo's. Not a mark on his face. If he was beaten, it didn't show. In fact, the only thing in the police report, and none of the eyewitnesses reported him being beaten. The police report only mentions that the policeman who arrested him noticed that there was some blood on his finger. Did not report any other wounds. Does that sound like someone who was in mortal danger and that the response was proportionate to the threat? That this justifies that. I'm reluctant to speak as freely as I want to in my heart about where we have gotten with race relations. The price that I'll have to pay to speak honestly is very high. We're headed toward a really, really rough patch. I don't want to see it happen. And we are going to have to look honestly and unflinchingly at the reality of where we are in this country in our relationships with blacks and whites, because it is worse than it has ever been in my lifetime. And there is no legitimate justification for it. We are in a distorted. You remember at the carnival where there was this hall of mirrors where you stand in front of one mirror and it made you really tall and thin, and you stand in another and it made you really fat and short. These Funhouse mirrors, they distort reality. That's where we are in the United States and probably the world, and this is the grand distorter. We've gone into these echo chambers where we just feed off the foolishness and madness of some very often unethical, ethically challenged people who are more interested in getting clout and maybe making some money and just kind of playing along with the game like it's a game, us against them. Let me tell you something. The numbers do not work in your favor. my friends. We need some adults in the room. We need more voices talking directly to the people who are being reckless with the Black community's reputation. There are not enough Black people who are talking to some of these folks who are really being reckless and saying, y'all need to shut the fuck up and sit down, because this does not justify that. And if that's where we are, and that's the kind of world we want to live in, things are going to get really bad really quick. I pray for courage, my own courage. I pray for all of our courage to address this unflinchingly and courageously, and addressing this problem that is getting worse and worse by the day with realism. Realism, not this funhouse distorted mirror that we're playing where we think that half the country is trying to kill us on a daily basis. More later. I have my concerns. Peace.